A man loses his job. Watch what happens next, not dramatically, not in a single conversation, but gradually in the texture of how people respond to him. The phone calls that come less frequently, the social invitations that quietly stop arriving, the subtle shift in how people in his environment look at him, speak to him, position themselves relative to him, the romantic interest that cools without explanation, the respect that does not disappear all at once, but simply becomes less available, less automatic, less something he can count on. Now run the same scenario with a woman. She loses her income. Her financial situation deteriorates. Her earning capacity is reduced or interrupted. Does her social value collapse at the same rate? Does the attention she receives evaporate? Do the people around her suddenly recategorize her worth? Not usually, not in the same way, not at the same speed. And that asymmetry, that gap between how male financial status and female financial status are processed by the social environment, is the uncomfortable truth that almost nobody addresses directly. Because addressing it directly means acknowledging something that the official cultural narrative insists is not true. That for men, money is not just a resource. It is not just comfort or security or the means to acquire things. It is perceived worth. It is the primary variable through which male value is socially calculated, and when it disappears, much of what was attached to it disappears with it. Society does not say this openly, but it behaves as if it were the only rule that matters. Today we are going to look directly at why, not to generate resentment, not to produce a complaint, but to give you a clear, honest, unvarnished understanding of the system you're operating in, so that you can operate within it strategically rather than being operated on by it unknowingly. Here's the foundational principle, the one that everything else in this conversation builds on. A man is evaluated by output, not by intention, not by emotional availability, not by potential that has not yet materialized. Output. What has he produced? What is he currently producing? What can he demonstrably provide? Those are the questions the social assessment system asks, and money is the most legible, most quantifiable, most immediately visible form of output available. It is the shorthand the system used to answer those questions quickly, automatically, and at scale. This is not a moral judgment. It is a structural observation. The social processing of male value is organized around utility, and utility is measured by output. And output in the modern world is most directly expressed in financial terms. That is the system. Understanding the system is not the same as endorsing it, but refusing to see it clearly is a form of strategic blindness that produces real costs for the men who choose it. The binary that captures this most directly is one that sounds provocative until you examine it carefully. Men are evaluated as human doings. Women are evaluated as human beings. The man who does nothing, who produces nothing, who contributes nothing measurable to his environment, is not extended the default social value that his existence alone would generate if he were a woman. He must perform. He must produce. He must demonstrate ongoing utility, and the primary currency in which that utility is denominated is financial. The question worth asking is why this is the case. Where does this evaluative structure come from? And the answer requires going back further than the current cultural moment. For the vast majority of human history, the capacity of a man to provide resources was not a social preference or a cultural expectation. It was a survival variable. In environments where the physical demands of resource acquisition were significant, where protection from external threats was necessary, where the margin between adequate provision and insufficient provision determined whether a family unit survived, a man's ability to provide was the most consequential thing about him. The neurological and psychological architecture that developed to evaluate male partners in those environments was calibrated around that variable. Does this man have the capacity to acquire resources? Does he have the competence and the status to ensure that the people in his care have what they need? Those questions were not luxury assessments. They were the core of mate selection psychology in an environment where the answers had life or death consequences. Modern money is the functional equivalent of those historical resources in the perceptual system that was built to evaluate them. The psychological imprint of thousands of years of evolutionary pressure does not simply dissolve because the environment changes. The assessment continues to run. The criteria have been translated into modern terms: wealth, income, financial trajectory, career status. These are the modern proxies for what the ancestral assessment system was actually looking for, which was provision capacity. And the signal that money sends in the modern context is not purely financial. It signals competence. It signals status within a hierarchy. It signals that this man has been evaluated by systems external to your personal interaction with him and found capable. It signals future potential in a way that promises are categorically unable to do. Money is not just money in the social processing system. It is shorthand for an entire constellation of qualities that matter to survival-informed mate selection in psychology. This is why the correlation between male income and social perception is so robust. It is not a superficial response to wealth as a symbol. It is a deep, evolved, largely automatic response to the information that wealth carries about the man who possesses it. Let's look at what this produces in practical, observable terms, because the theoretical framing is only useful if it connects to things you can actually see in the world around you. A high-earning man moves through the social environment differently than a financially struggling man, and the difference is not primarily a function of what he buys. It is a function of how he is perceived before he has said anything or done anything. Social invitations flow toward him more naturally. Interactions carry more energy. The people in his environment orient toward him with more interest and more deference. His opinions are treated as more worth hearing. His judgment is assumed to be more reliable. His presence in a social situation is read as a signal of the quality of that situation. The financially struggling man experienced the inverse of all of that. Not necessarily hostility, not open disrespect in most cases, but a kind of social gravity that works against him rather than with him. His opinions are assessed with more skepticism. His social invitations are generated and received with less enthusiasm. The interest and attention that flow relatively freely toward the high-earning man require more effort from him to produce. He has to work harder against a perceptual default that is not in his favor. In the romantic landscape, this dynamic is particularly visible and particularly consequential. The correlation between male financial status and perceived romantic desirability is one of the most consistent findings in relationship psychology. This is frequently framed, particularly by men who find it uncomfortable, as evidence of shallow values or materialistic prioritization. That framing misses the actual mechanism. The psychological process that drives female partner assessment is not primarily asking how much money does this man have. It is asking a more fundamental question. Is this man capable? Is he moving upward or downward? Is he someone around whom a stable, secure future can be constructed? Financial status is the most legible proxy for answering those questions efficiently. It is risk assessment psychology, operating beneath conscious awareness, translating evolutionary criteria into modern evaluations. This is the distinction between what is sometimes dismissively called gold digging and what is actually operating in the vast majority of cases. Gold digging, in its literal sense, is the conscious calculation of a partner's value based on current wealth. What operates in most cases is more subtle and more pervasive. It is an automatic evaluation of a man's provision capacity using financial status as the primary input. Most women who operate according to this psychology are not consciously aware that they are doing so. The processing is too deep and too automatic for conscious access in most cases, but the outputs of that processing are visible in the patterns of partner selection. Now here's the nuance that the simple version of this argument misses, and it is important enough to address directly. It is not only current wealth that drives this assessment, it is trajectory. A man without money, but with visible direction, is processed differently than a man without money and without direction. The upward-moving man, the one whose current financial position is modest, but whose trajectory communicates momentum, whose competence is evident even if his current income is limited, whose ambition is legible in his behavior and his focus, is not assessed the same way as the man who is simply static. Future potential, when it is credible, softens the perception of a present lack. What is genuinely damaging to social perception is not poverty, it is stagnation. The man who has been in the same financial position for years, with no visible effort to change it, who has not developed skills, not pursued advancement, not invested in any form of upward movement, communicates something specific through that stagnation. He communicates an absence of drive, an absence of ambition, an absence of the forward momentum that the provision assessment system is actually looking for. The money itself is partly a proxy for that underlying quality. And when the proxy is absent and no other evidence of the underlying quality is present, the assessment defaults to its most unfavorable interpretation. The romantic market operates on a compressed version of this logic. In partner selection psychology, A man who is going somewhere is more compelling than a man who has arrived somewhere and stopped, because the assessment is partly about future security, not just present status. A man with trajectory communicates something about what he is likely to become. A man with stagnation communicates something about his ceiling. This brings us to the tactical layer, because understanding the dynamics without understanding what to do about them is diagnostics without treatment. The first rule: never tie your identity exclusively to your income. This is not an argument against caring about financial performance. Caring about financial performance is appropriate because financial performance matters in ways that this entire conversation has made clear. The danger is in allowing the social equation of male worth with financial output to become the internal equation you apply to yourself. Here is why this matters practically. If you have internalized the belief that your value as a person is determined by your income, then your income fluctuations become identity fluctuations. A financial setback becomes a personal invalidation. A period of reduced earning becomes a period of reduced self-worth. And reduced self-worth produces the behavioral patterns, the anxiety, the desperation, the approval seeking that erode the social perception of value faster than the financial reduction alone would. The man who has built his identity exclusively around his earning capacity is the most vulnerable to the very dynamics we have been discussing, not because those dynamics are unfair, but because he has given them direct access to his psychological foundation. Every decline in the external measure becomes a collapse of the internal structure. The protective alternative is to build a value stack that is broader than income, skills that exist independently of any specific employment situation, relationships built on genuine mutual regard rather than status exchange, physical capacity and health that communicate vitality and discipline, emotional resilience that does not require external validation to remain intact. A sense of direction that persists across financial fluctuations because it is rooted in something deeper than the current income number. The income matters, but it is one layer of a broader stack. The man who has built only one layer is one disruption away from having nothing. The second rule: build competence before you chase validation. This is the sequencing error that catches the most men in the most painful pattern. The desire for social validation, for the respect and attention and romantic interest that financial success generates, is real and legitimate. The problem is when the desire for the outcome precedes the development of the foundation that produces the outcome. Validation pursued in the absence of genuine competence is fragile. It requires constant maintenance because there is no underlying substance to sustain it. The man who attempts to project financial success he does not have, to perform a status he has not earned, to access the social rewards of a position he has not built, is running an architecture with no foundation. And architectures without foundations collapse under the weight of any meaningful pressure. The sequence that produces durable results is different. Competence first. The actual development of skills, the genuine building of capabilities, the real investment in the qualities that produce financial and social outcomes over time. Money amplifies competence, but it does not create it. The man who has built genuine competence has something that his financial position reflects, but that does not disappear if the financial position temporarily declines. The man who has built only the performance of competence has nothing when the performance becomes unsustainable. Competence creates internal confidence that is not contingent on external confirmation. The man who knows, at a genuine level, that he is capable, that he has built real skills, that he has invested seriously in his own development, does not need the external validation to maintain his psychological equilibrium. He is not asking the social environment to tell him he has worth. He has established that for himself through the actual work of building something real. The validation, when it comes, is confirmation rather than foundation. The third rule: protect your financial momentum. Momentum is a more strategically important variable than current balance. The man whose financial trajectory is upward, who is consistently adding to his capabilities, his income, his asset base, his network, is building something that compounds in ways that are not visible in any individual month, but that produce dramatically different outcomes over multi-year periods. The focus on momentum rather than current position changes how you make decisions. It prioritizes skill acquisition over status signaling. It prioritizes income growth over lifestyle inflation. It prioritizes asset acquisition over consumption. It prioritizes debt control over the short-term satisfaction of spending that your current position can barely support. The compounding principle operates here in a way that is exactly parallel to financial compounding. Small advantages in financial trajectory scale dramatically over time. The man who increases his earning capacity by a modest percentage each year, who acquires assets that appreciate and generate income, who controls his debt obligations so that his monthly obligations do not consume his financial flexibility, builds a financial position over a decade that looks qualitatively different from the man who earned the same total income but spent it as it arrived. And the social perception of financial trajectory is itself a compound. The man who is consistently moving upward generates a social reputation for upward momentum that precedes him. People begin anticipating his future position as much as they respond to his current one. That anticipation is itself a form of social capital that generates opportunities, introductions, and access that further accelerates the trajectory it was generated by. Now let's talk about the power dimension of this, because money is not just income. It is a qualitatively different kind of resource than the money itself suggests. Money is optionality, and optionality is the foundation of leverage. And leverage is the structural characteristic that changes how you are positioned in every negotiations, every relationship, every interaction where stakes are present. The man who has financial resources has geographic freedom. He can live where his life is best served rather than where his financial constraints require him to be. He can relocate when a better environment presents itself. He can access experiences, networks, and opportunities that are geographically distributed. Geographic flexibility is not a luxury. It is a strategic capacity. The man who has financial resources has social leverage. He can participate in the social environments where opportunities cluster. He can invest in relationships in the ways that produce genuine reciprocal value rather than the one-directional value extraction of someone who needs rather than chooses. He can operate from a position of abundance rather than scarcity in his social interactions, which changes the dynamic of those interactions at a fundamental level. The man who has financial resources has emotional independence, not because money solves emotional problems, but because the absence of financial stress removes a category of pressure that, when present, consistently degrades decision-making quality. Financial anxiety produces a psychological state that is not compatible with the kind of clear, patient, strategic thinking that produces good outcomes in every domain. The man who has eliminated financial anxiety from his daily experience has cognitive and emotional bandwidth available for everything else that the financially anxious man is consuming on survival management. And the man who has financial resources has negotiation power in every context where negotiation occurs. In employment, in business, in relationships, in any situation where an outcome depends on the relative leverage of parties, the man who does not need the specific outcome in front of him has a structurally superior position to the man who does. Need reduces leverage. Financial sufficiency reduces need, and reduced need is the foundation of the kind of non-desperate engagement that the social perception system reads as high value. The feedback loop operates in multiple directions simultaneously. Financial resources produce optionality. Optionality produces leverage. Leverage produces better outcomes. Better outcomes produce more resources. The loop that runs in the other direction is equally consistent. Financial fragility produces anxiety. Anxiety produces desperation. Desperation produces the behavioral signals that erode social perception. Eroded social perception reduces access to opportunities. Reduced opportunities sustain the financial fragility. The man who understands these loops and takes them seriously is not a victim of them. He is a participant who can choose which loop to operate in and take deliberate action to enter it and sustain his position within it. Let's look at what happens to a man's social standing when a financial fragility sets in, because the mechanism is worth understanding in detail rather than in general terms. When income disappears or significantly declines, the first thing that changes is not the man himself. His character has not changed. His intelligence has not changed. His values, his capabilities, his potential, none of those have changed. What has changed is the signal he is projecting into the social environment. And because the social environment processes signals rather than substance, the response to the changed signal is immediate and automatic, even though the underlying substance remains constant. Social capital, the accumulated goodwill, respect, and relational access that a man has built over time, is more durable than the immediate signal. It provides a buffer. The man who has built genuine relationships, who has demonstrated genuine value over time to the people in his life, does not lose all of that capital overnight when his financial position declines. The relationships built on genuine mutual regard persist through adversity in a way that relationships built primarily on status exchange do not, but the buffer is limited. In the broader social environment, the ambient perception of people who do not know him well responds to the signal change faster and more completely. The social invisibility that financial decline produces is not imaginary. It is the automatic output of a social processing system that uses financial status as a primary proxy for male value, being updated with new information. Financial fragility also produces a specific psychological response in the man experiencing it that tends to accelerate the social perception change. Anxiety, which is the natural psychological response to financial threat, produces behavioral signals that the social environment reads as instability. The subtle desperation in communication, the over-explaining and over-justifying, the reduction in the easy confidence that is the natural output of security. These behavioral changes are real and they are readable, and they compound the signal change that the financial decline itself produced. Understanding the cycle is not about condemning men for experiencing it. It is about recognizing it clearly enough to interrupt it deliberately. The man who maintains his psychological framework, his behavioral dignity, his sense of forward direction through a period of financial difficulty is not performing denial of his situation. He is protecting the social capital that will be part of how he rebuilds from it. There is a layer of societal contradiction around this topic that deserves to be named directly because it is part of what makes navigating this dynamic so psychologically difficult for men. Society says money is not everything. It says this consistently and loudly. It produces cultural narratives that position the pursuit of wealth as spiritually corrupting, that celebrate the man who found meaning outside of financial success, that frame the desire for money as evidence of shallowness or misplaced values. These narratives are real and pervasive. And then, in its actual behavior, the same society does the opposite of what those narratives claim. It rewards high earners with social elevation, romantic access, professional opportunity, and cultural glorification. It produces media that consistently associates male success with financial achievement. It positions entrepreneurs, investors, and high-earning professionals as cultural heroes. It glorifies male wealth in every format available to it simultaneously, with insisting that male worth is not connected to financial position. This cognitive dissonance is not accidental, and it is not harmless. It produces in men a specific form of confusion. The man who has absorbed the official narrative that money does not determine worth and then experiences the social reality that it does is being gaslit by the cultural environment he inhabits. He is being told that the ground rules are one thing and then penalized for playing by them. Understanding the contradiction does not resolve it, but it does allow you to navigate it more clearly. The official narrative and the operative reality are different. Act according to what the system actually does, not what it officially claims to do. The psychology of respect is worth examining in this context because respect is one of the most fundamental social goods that men seek, and its relationship to financial status is more complex than a simple equation. Respect does follow hierarchy, and hierarchy does frequently correlate with resources. The social processing system that registers financial position as an indicator of male value is producing respect responses that track financial status as a proxy for status in the hierarchy. This is why the financially successful man receives automatic respect from people who know nothing about him beyond his financial position. And it is why the financially struggling man must work significantly harder to generate respect responses from the same people. But here's the crucial distinction. Respect generated by financial status alone is conditional respect. It is contingent on the continuation of the financial status. When the status changes, the respect recalibrates accordingly. The respect that is generated by demonstrated character, by consistent behavior over time, by the actual qualities of the man rather than the proxy signal of his financial position, is more durable. It does not recalibrate instantly when circumstances change, because it was not generated by a circumstance. The strategic implication is to pursue both in parallel rather than treating them as alternatives. Build the financial position, because it is real and its effects are real. And simultaneously build the character and behavioral track record that generates the kind of respect that persists through financial fluctuation. Neither alone is optimal. Together they produce a social position that is both immediately effective and genuinely durable. The mistake that most men make in response to the dynamics we have been discussing takes one of two forms, and both are ultimately forms of the same underlying error. The first form is the complete rejection of financial ambition, on the grounds that the system that rewards it is unjust, or that the value it generates is illusory. This position feels principled. It is actually a form of strategic abdication. Rejecting the game because you disagree with its rules does not change the rules. It simply removes you from the game while the game continues to operate exactly as it did before. The man who opts out of financial development because he resents the social weight attached to it ends up experiencing exactly the consequences that the social weight predicts, not because the system was right to attach those consequences, but because the system does not modify its operation in response to individual protest. The second form is the complete subordination of identity to financial performance. The man who has made income the singular measure of his worth is not free. He is the most captive man in the room. Because his psychological well-being, his sense of dignity, his capacity for genuine relationship, all of it is hostage to a number that fluctuates with circumstances he cannot fully control. And the man who worships money has handed his identity to a variable, and variables are unreliable custodians. The balanced path is harder and less dramatic than either extreme. Build wealth without building ego around it. Develop financial capacity as a strategic resource while maintaining an identity that exists independently of what that resource currently measures. Understand the game clearly enough to play it effectively while understanding yourself clearly enough not to confuse the game with your worth. Here's the philosophical distinction that I want you to hold as the frame through which all of this resolves into something actionable. There's a difference between intrinsic worth and market value. They are not the same thing, and they are not measured by the same instruments. Intrinsic worth is what you are as a human being, your dignity, your character, your capacity for connection, and meaning, your unique perspective on existence. These things are not generated by your income. They are not increased or decreased by your financial position. They are the non-negotiable foundation of what you are, independent of any social assessment. Market value is what the social system perceives you to be based on the signals available to it. Market value is real. Its effects are real. The way it determines social access, romantic opportunity, professional leverage, and the ambient quality of your interactions with the world around you is real and consequential. But market value is a perception, generated by a social processing system that uses proxies to approximate qualities it cannot directly measure. Those proxies are imperfect. The system is imperfect. And the man who confuses his market value at any given moment with his intrinsic worth has made a category error with serious psychological consequences. The man who understands this distinction operates differently. He takes his market value seriously because it has real effects on his life. He invests in improving it because improvement is available and the results of improvement are genuine. But he does not live and die by its fluctuations because he understands that the fluctuations are measuring a proxy, not the thing itself. He is playing the game with full engagement while understanding that the game is not the totality of what he is. This understanding is the foundation of the kind of strategic engagement with the financial and social system that produces results without producing the specific kind of psychological damage that complete identification with those results creates. Building leverage is the long-term game, and leverage is not just financial capital, though financial capital is the most legible form of it. Social capital is leverage. The genuine relationships, the networks built on real mutual value, the reputation accumulated through consistent behavior over time, all of it constitutes capital that can be deployed in ways that financial capital alone cannot access. The man who is wealthy in both financial and social capital has a resilience that neither alone provides. Intellectual capital is leverage. The skills, knowledge, and capabilities you have developed are not on any balance sheet, but they are genuinely valuable in ways that the market will eventually price. The man who has invested seriously in his own intellectual development has something that no external circumstance can take from him, because it is stored in him rather than in an account. Physical capital is leverage. The health, vitality, and physical capacities that comes from taking your body seriously as a resource communicate something in every interaction you have. Physical presence that commands attention is not purely genetic. It is the accumulated output of discipline, investment, and consistent care for the most fundamental asset you have. The man who stacks all of these forms of capital is not simply wealthy in the narrow financial sense. He is powerful in a way that money alone cannot produce. And that power is both more durable and more broadly expressed than any single dimension accumulation. The world will continue to judge men by output. It will continue to use financial position as the primary proxy for male value. It will continue to distribute social access, romantic attention, professional opportunity, and ambient respect, according to a formula that heavily weights financial performance. That is the system. It was not designed by any individual, and it will not be reformed by any individual's resentment of it. You have two choices. You can spend your energy arguing with the standard, resenting its unfairness, producing complaints about a system that is not listening and would not change even if it were. That path leaves you with the resentment and the consequences both, because the system operates exactly as it always has regardless of your evaluations of its fairness. Or you can understand the rules clearly, build the capacity that the rules reward, increase your leverage systematically, develop the financial, social, intellectual, and physical capital that produces the outcomes you want in a system that has made its criteria legible even if it has not made them just. And simultaneously, never confuse your performance in that system with your identity. You are not your income, but your income matters. Both of those things are true at the same time. In a world that measures men by output, the smartest position is not denial of the measurement and not submission to it as the definition of your worth. It is mastery, mastery of the game, clarity about what the game is, and the psychological foundation that allows you to play it with full engagement while remaining underneath all of it, exactly entirely yourself. The standard is real. Rise to it strategically, intelligently, deliberately, and never let it tell you what you are.